season, we were talking a little bit more about the African Continental Free Trade Area. And now that trading has commenced, we will evidently be speaking to different aspects of the African Continental Free Trade Area. By the end of the day, we're always going to be speaking about Agenda 2063, of which, of course, African Continental Free Trade is but one of the many other flagship programs. My name is Emmanuel K. Benson Jr. Happy to be coming your way. Normally start the show with two segments: Africa Peer Review Mechanism Watch, give updates of developments around the African Peer Review Mechanism, and then we delve a bit into East Africa, developments happening in East Africa. Maybe there's some publications, maybe there's some developments and stories and so on. Then we'll zoom into the interview. So happy to be coming your way once again, and hope to take a quick break before getting very quickly into updates of the African Peer Review Mechanism. We'll take a quick break right now. All right, so welcome once again to Agenda 2063, the show in Ghana, the region, the continent, speaking to issues around the African continent and especially issues around Africa's integration. But today, even though we spend the better part of the time talking about the African Continental Free Trade Area, we are still always going to talk about Agenda 2063, whether it's Aspiration 7, which talks about the AU as a global player, or silencing the guns, or whichever else. But with today's show, we're going to have a very interesting conversation with two people. But before that, we're going to get into the segments of the Africa Peer Review Mechanism, and then here on East Africa. So I'm going to very quickly get into that as our time is far spent. Let me just quickly give you a quick update on Africa Peer Review Mechanism. Last week I talked a bit about Africa Peer Review Mechanism, especially for those who are not very familiar with some of the AU institutions, because for some of us, the Africa Peer Review Mechanism, what is part of this show, to give people a sense of the fact that the AU is a real and important institution that has many organs, has many agencies that are doing very different and very important things. Now, the Africa Peer Review Mechanism for us has been very pivotal in the discussion, because they're targeting 2023 as the time when hopefully many other member states would have acceded towards what they say, hashtag towards universal accession. That is to say that out of the 32 or 33 countries, over 55 countries that have currently acceded to the African Peer Review Mechanism, we're hoping that by 2023, that's only in 2 years' time, then many more countries, about the 20 left or so countries, would have acceded, and would have a continent that is fully acceded to the African Peer Review Mechanism, monitoring each other regularly, checking whether our parameters around good governance are can be peer reviewed and that kind of thing. But for some of us, the African Peer Review Mechanism is also important because the APRM has become an important vector and predictor of peace and security, which, of course, the back of that is good governance as well. We know what the APRM did in Kenya in 2008. It predicted the crisis there. We also know that it predicted the xenophobia in Southern Africa. And we also know that the Africa Peer Review Mechanism is doing very good work on the African Governance Report. Last December, the committee met in South Africa to discuss the Africa Governance Report, the next one, the 2021 report. I believe it's been validated. Some of us have the copy and have even the communication strategy on how it will roll out over the next couple of weeks. For some, the Africa Governance Report could be construed as a competitor to things like the Afrobarometer, which some of you may not know that is actually supported by donors. But the Africa Governance Report actually is a fully fledged AU report led by the Africa Peer Review Mechanism at the Continental Secretariat in South Africa, in Midrand, South Africa. So over the next couple of weeks, we'll be giving you updates on developments around the Africa Governance Report, developments around the Africa Peer Review Mechanism. They're very active on Twitter. So if you're a Twitter follower, you may want to follow them on at APRMORG and just have a quick look at some of the developments that have been going on there. So that is very quickly a quick update today of the Africa Peer Review Mechanism Watch. I'm going to very quickly then go into the year on East Africa. I get a kick out of talking about East Africa. Some have been asking me whether, I'm an East African at birth. I make a lot of noise about East Africa, given that I'm from West Africa. They don't quite understand what is quite happening. But for me, the reason why East Africa is a very important place to watch has to do with the developments around regional integration. And if you're someone who has been looking at integration the number of years that I have, you will see that there are a lot of things that East Africa we can learn from. And of course, there are things that they can learn from us. But the one thing that they can learn, that we can learn, the world can learn from East Africa, especially a country like Kenya, is M-Pesa, mobile money. I was just reading a report just only a few days ago that speaks to mobile money. And I think this is a very important time to remind ourselves, especially with developments and COVID, how central mobile money, cashless flows, and all these things have become. Let me just quickly refer you to this mobile money report, which speaks to the whole issue of why mobile money has become very, 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 very critical this time. Can you believe that on the continent, 469 million registered accounts of mobile money? That far outclasses any of the other regions, whether it's in Europe or whether it's in Asia and so on and so forth. 469 registered accounts. 469 million, registered accounts. And 181 million are actually active. This compares to South Asia, where there are 315 million registered and 91 million registered. But you see, Kenya is critical in the conversation on mobile money because mobile money, M-Pesa came out from Kenya. And today, the statistics and the information from the mobile money report says that about 96% of Kenyans are now using M-Pesa mobile money, which is quite incredible. It has not gotten to that stage across the continent yet, but evidently it has become a very important tool for a lot of people. So let me quickly, for those who may want to look out for this report, the report is by Vox DevLit, and it's called Simply Mobile Money. It's a 28-page report detailing what the centrality of mobile money in our conversation on Africa's development, how far it has come, where it's going, what Kenya has been doing, and what countries like Tanzania and Uganda have also been doing. It looks like it's largely an East African thing, that they've had that experience. That's their comparative advantage. They're developing it and they're using it. So, of course, East Africans are the experts that we need to go to if we want to know more about mobile money. And of course, the leader is Kenya. That is one thing I guess a lot of people who do not follow things like this probably would not have known about. So we're happy to be coming your way, and we hope to be able to unpack some of these important developments to you over the course of the next couple of months, so that we all get out from each edition of the show satisfied that we are getting to know a little bit more about it in the 2063, but also about the different regions on the continent and the important thematic areas that we talk about. So thank you once again for making your time to join us today. I think we are ready now to get into the real conversation, the beef of the conversation today, which is on the Africa Private Sector Summit, which is going to take place in March, 8th to 12th March. The very first of its kind, an umbrella private sector initiative bringing what we call superstar Pan-African organizations, including the ECA, the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the East African Chamber of Commerce, my own organization, After Policy Network, even though we may be a midget, but we're also a superstar organization, if I may chip in that. We're a partner, but we are also doing our little to ensure that some of the work is going on with the Africa Private Summit. And of course, the Association of African Universities is also part of the superstar, Pan-African organizations, and an organization that doesn't get enough visibility in my view. And I'm very happy that they are part of this, having an important conversation on linking academia to private sector and then looking at the journey and the narrative ahead. So very happy to have two people who are part of the organizing committee who will help speak to the issue of the Africa Private Sector Summit. We have Winkate Mutai, who will tell us a little bit about herself and what she's doing with the Africa Private Sector Summit, as well as Dr. Sam Ndoga of the University of Pretoria as well, who is the summit coordinator, and who will also be telling us what he has been doing around the Africa Private Sector Summit and what we're going to do about the way forward. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a very beautiful and hot day in Accra, virtually, and to this Agenda 2063 show. I hope you can hear me. Hello, Winkate. Dr. Ndoga.
Yes, I can hear you.
All right. Great. Dr. Ndoga, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I can hear you. Thank you.
Great. So let me go the traditional way and start with ladies first. Winkate Mutai. Tell me a little bit about yourself. I think it's always important that we spend a lot of the time looking at the people doing the things. We don't hear enough about them. I know you're a splendid, fabulous person, so tell me a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into what you're doing with the Africa Private Sector Summit.
Great. Thank you very much, Bensa, for the opportunity, and thank you everyone who's tuned in to this conversation. My name is Winkate Mutai. I am currently the program manager at the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce and Industry. A little bit about my background is that I would say it's quite diverse, and I believe if we have more young people on the same route, we could have quite an interesting workforce. I majored in mechatronic engineering, and in the course of 5 years, I also dealt with youth leadership development, both in Kenya and in Ethiopia. And through that engagement with different bodies such as the UNECA as well as the AU on matters of youth, I then ended up in the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce and Industry, trying to figure out how do we get the private sector at the forefront of the discussions, and also understanding the majority of the people who are taking part in the support of trade in the continent are women and youth. And therefore, this is the kind of skills that I bring about onto that, aside from having a bit of background in brand management as well as communications. So that's a little bit about me. The rest I'll be able to chip in, and I'll leave the floor for Dr. Donga to join in.
Well, let me just chip in very quickly. My shoes are appropriately on a red carpet at the moment. Hearing all that you have to say about yourself, I believe that we have to add a little bit more red carpet to all the credentials that you have. Very nice to have you on the show, Winkate. Very impressive resume you have there. Dr. Ndoga. Dr. Ndoga, I believe that I'm going to have to order more red carpets. So please go ahead and let's hear a little bit about you as well.
Yeah, so I come out of academics, been a professor at the university for over 27 years, and then I ventured more into consultancy and leadership training, which basically set me on a bit of a footprint across the continent in the last 12 or so years, and basically trying to raise almost a new brand of thinking across the continent, because our I believe that our crisis is really leadership.
Okay.
There's nothing wrong with our continent. We have 4 hemispheres. We have insurmountable natural resources. We have a very young, qualified population, and human resource capacity, which is an envy of many nations in the world. So to really have a continent that's not working under our watch, and especially as an academic, where I'm responsible for producing the creme de la creme, I have to ask myself, what are we doing? So I think the best repositioning for me was to seek to go more onto the field, onto the marketplace, so that we really start changing mindsets, and people don't see themselves as backward or poor or totally helpless, or even the AIDS syndrome that has also plagued us with labels that we have accepted which are not authentic. So my view has always been we just need to do more across the continent. So that's a little bit about myself.
Thank you so very much for that important introduction. And change, the crisis you talked about is leadership. And I'm happy where you underscored that point, because I think that will be at the heart of the discussion on the Africa Private Sector Summit. And so I'm going to start off with Winkate, who is the program manager of the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce based in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And she's going to tell us what she's currently doing with the organizers of the summit, and in her view, why this meeting is so very important for everyone to attend. Let's hear you, Winkate. Hello, Winkate.
Thank you. Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Bensa. And just before I start out, I want to also reiterate what Dr. Sam has said with regards to leadership and how important it is, and especially towards our youth, and understanding that they can be able to take their forefront. Coming back to the Africa Private Sector Summit, I'm more or less on the technical background. With the website and managing on the registrations, and more or less offering the support. And the other additional thing now that we do as a chamber is to get to our constituents, particularly with our partners and who we engage with, the regional chambers, which will be the East African Chamber of Commerce, Industry and Agriculture, as well as the Federation of West African Chambers of Commerce and Industry, to get them aware about this particular conference and what is the importance of the private sector being at the forefront of the discussion that has taken over 2021 in Africa, which is the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. So we are trying to get the private sector represented. We want them to chime in their comments for us to also understand the situation on the ground, where it's not only talking about an agreement, but also getting to understand what is the reality. And from those realities, we can be able to now have a constructive discussion between the public and the private sector during this 5-day-long engagement on the different topics that will affect how the ASCFTA is implemented, and also particularly how the private sector would drive that implementation. So we are hoping that through this engagement, through the call of papers, the exhibitions, the Q&As that we'll also be having, the open platforms we'll give for the platform to, or rather for the private sector to engage with us, we can be able to understand what needs to be done, especially on a policy level. How do we need to create enabling business environments in the different countries, and overall have them understand what is the fundamental nature of the ASCFTA and how they need to get ready, especially for the competition, as well as the open directive of having a single market will affect them and how they will be able to do the projections. So this is just some of the things that we are looking at and are keen into, and it will be important for anyone to join in, because through this conversation, we don't turn it into a Ferris wheel of saying the same things when under the ground, or things that we may not necessarily see on surface are really different between paper and reality. So if we are able to have that input, I believe all these different stakeholders, as you mentioned, the different organizations on board, can be able to now chime in their own programs and interventions collaboratively with the private sector to be able to remove the different barriers that would eventually affect the proper implementation of the ASFTA. So that would be my interjection on this.
And as someone who works for a prestigious chamber like the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce, in your view, what in the past have been some of the problems that have bedeviled the Africa private sector? I know there's a lot of talk about enabling, creating an enabling environment, for the private sector in the context of the African Continental Free Trade. And that is one of the important themes for this summit. But is that the only thing that has dogged the private sector, the enabling environment, or are there other things that you think, in your experience, also ought to be broached?
Well, it boils down to the information breakdown, right? Is the information trickling down to the person who's supposed to act on it? I would pose this as a challenge to everyone on the board here. Have you possibly gone across the street from your building and asked any one of those vendors if they know what the ASFTA is? The most likely answer you'll get is no. And even if you come from there, even talk about exporters and importers, do they have the familiarity of what this is? So already they have the challenges when it comes to cross-border trade, which we already know in Africa it's quite low, since the system, since the colonial era has focused more on commodities, where we had the trade routes being from Africa, either to Europe or to Africa to America, not necessarily within the continent. So there already are challenges of the systems, of how they run, like what you'd have the systems running within West Africa, East Africa, the different regions is very different, to even people understanding what is the business ethic within those different countries. So as much as we have the internet day and age, some of these things still remain unknown. And it would be important to have that understanding of what is the situation of, you say, doing business in somewhere like Botswana or doing business in Algeria. We may not be as familiar with that and what would be the regulations. So aside talking about the enabling environment, it's also about the people understanding what the agreement is about, and let alone that, also getting to have a familiarity with the nations that they would be trading with.
It's still sticking with you for a minute before I go to Dr. Ndoga. In your view, Winkate, before I quickly get to Dr. Ndoga, I'd like you to give me a little bit of country experience from your own country of Kenya, and then also from what you see in Ethiopia, where you work. What is the level of understanding around the African Continental Free Trade area, in your view, as candidly as possible? In both your country and of Kenya, and then in Addis, where you work.
Get me in trouble.
Well, no, well, at least your perception of what you well, could be low, high. Yeah.
That is true.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
It depends again on who you're talking to. I would say that the governments are aware about this because they had to do the ratification of the, with the instruments, deposit the instruments at the AU. So the government level would say they understand what the ASFTA is about. When you come down to the people themselves, they may not, I would say the percentage is quite low. Possibly, if I'm being very candid, I would say 10%. And this would be those who have either paid attention to TV or really wanted to know more about what this is, what the whole ASFTA is about. One thing I will mention, though, in context to this, is that I've seen that there is movement and traction with other nations. For example, with Nigeria, they announced they have a national committee on the ASFTA. They announced that they are going to start a nationwide, communications and roadshow just to make sure everybody is understanding what is be expected of them and how they can prepare themselves. So as much as we started in January 1st, is the countries preparing something similar where the information is going to trickle down to the key players. And when we're talking about the private sector, it's not just about the multi-corporations, we're talking all the way down to the SMEs for them to know how this would be, or how they would take advantage of the Continental Free Trade Area. So that would be my candid input on that.
Really appreciate it. I really appreciate it, and I hope I didn't get into trouble. But so I'm going to use awareness raising for you, Dr. Ndoga. I know that South Africa has just come off, has just stepped down for DRC to take over the chair of the African Union. Dr. Ramaphosa was quite vocal on the level of what South Africa had to do, given that South Africa's countryman in Wamkelemene is also at the secretary, it's not so much about optics, but it's about making sure that, there's a handle on the African Continental Free Trade Area, and South Africa is also leading on that. In your view, still with awareness raising, what is it? Do you think that there's enough conversations around the African Continental Free Trade Area in South Africa? Hello, Dr. Ndoga?
Sorry, I lost you for a moment, but I think you were asking me about the conversation.
Yes.
Yes. So for me, there are two things. What is the vision of area that brilliant.
I think we're having some difficulty in hearing you. If it's possible to position yourself well.
Okay, let me move. Just hold on.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Yeah, is this better now?
Yes, it's much better. Thank you.
Okay. So on the one hand, what I'm saying is that the conceptualization at that level, we have done well. We know exactly the blueprint of what we want, and the conversations around that, I think, are quite robust. Hence, I guess the Agenda 2063 is embedded on part of those kinds of conversations. So I like to believe that what needs to be happening is happening. However, on the other side, where we really have gaps is the Africa we want is quite definitive, but the African we need, that is where we have challenges.
Yeah. Okay. And of course, in your view, the Africa Private Sector Summit will help answer some of these questions or some of these challenges that you think we have in the Africa we need.
I believe so, because the other philosophical problem with the way we have approached our challenges is to think that it's our governments and it's our politicians' responsibility to turn our nations around. I mean, history will show you that has not happened across the board. Politicians have come and gone. They have a 5-year to a 10-year tenure, depending on the number of years required for them in power and so forth. And these people are policymakers. The real transformation actually is a private sector responsibility. So if you are really bringing the private sector sector together to deliberate on issues that would translate into gaining ground towards the transformation of the Africa we want, I think we're beginning to answer the question, who is ideally positioned for this type of transformation that we want. Because number one, the private sector is not interested in the politics per se. They're interested more in the transformation agenda. Number two, the private sector is bent on action. The private sector will put resources where it matters the most, because these people want results, they want solutions, they want to see transformation. So by bringing like-minded people and players onto a summit of this nature, I think we really bringing our best philosophers and thinkers as well as practitioners together. I think we positioned for success.
Good. I'm happy on that optimistic note, because I want to use that to find out from you that, we've had many summits over the past decade plus.
Yeah.
Some have involved the private sector, some have involved policymakers, and so on and so forth. What is so different, so unique about this summit that people should be scrambling to register for it?
I think firstly, we obviously realize the very ethos of the question you're asking. I mean, I for one would tell you I am done with summits and conferences, and because I've done a few myself. I was part of a global group that used to bring 2,000-3,000 leaders together annually for these kinds of deliberations. Mm-hmm. What I noticed as a gap is people would present their papers, and then we would walk away with notes, and then we would pack away and wait for the next thing. Mm-hmm. What we're doing differently here is we want to translate on the fifth day of the conference, having interrogated all the key issues. Mm-hmm. On the last day of the conference, what it is bent on doing is to con statements that will culminate into actual decisions on projects that are critical for the continent in terms of turning us around. So we're just not interested in talking. We're saying that given all the success factors that we have on the continent, what are the critical things we need to attend to, and how do we consolidate ourselves around? In presenting my own ideas is to really think around diversifying focus areas, maybe regionally or across the different nations, because one of the things we can't keep on doing, which is why we're not making and realizing the progress we need to, is the fact that we have always tried to be successful in so many things all at the same time and with limited resources and capacity. What we can actually do from a summit of this nature is to actually reason and say, you know what, South Africa could specialize on this as their focal point of this free trade area. This is what you can specialize on for the sake of the beneficiation of the rest of the continent. Ghana can focus on this. Nigerians can do this. Kenya can do that, so that we can actually be, positioned strategically for inter-beneficiation of the multiple countries that are on this continent, so that it's not a cumbersome exercise where we want to see success and everybody's trying to do everything. That won't work. That won't work. That's why we have these conversations. Look at the developmental goals in the 2063 agenda. they have agriculture, they have water, they have disease fighting, those key sectors can be spread amongst the countries as targets according to their capacity and specializations. We can actually get this for the first time achieved. Have you noticed that most of our developmental goals, they were 2000, and then they were 2010, then they were 2020, then they were 2050, now it's 2063. We'll keep on goal shifting because we are taking on too much.
Yeah, we're taking on too much.
It's not achievable.
Because we are taking on too much, I guess this is the reason why academia needs to step in, right? Is that, bringing in organizations like the Association of African Universities to help develop a curriculum that will help begin to train people on African Continental Free Trade Area, directs and so on. Is that the reason why that kind of alliance that has not always been happening, the private sector and academia coming together on the conversation after, has become an important outcome of this summit?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic.
So can I, for a moment, can I make one quick comment as an academic and say you have noticed that on the continent,
yes,
we have so many highly qualified, highly educated people, some of us foreign trained, so we have gone and tapped into the best of knowledge elsewhere to bring it back home.
Yes.
But what you discover is as soon as we are back home to try and make a contribution, the conditions that exist are not ideal for us to make those kinds of contributions. That's one. Secondly, the type of information that you come with is so westernized and almost a misfit as far as the continental contextual realities are concerned. Now, by the same token, we are teaching, I don't know about you, EK, as I can confess myself, most of the things I learned in primary school and high school, I've never needed for the rest of my life.
But of course, you wouldn't have known that when you were learning it, you wouldn't have known that.
But we are still perpetuating the same curricular, limitations by sending our young people into universities where 70% of the sources of information are foreign.
Yeah. Wow.
So what a summit like this actually does is to take our academics from this ivory tower and bring them into a realistic check-in with existential challenges, and then try and wrap their minds around coming up with solutions, so that universities are not this elite, exclusive place for a chosen few. Universities must be churning out solutions. How come we don't have cars being manufactured on the continent up to now? I know Ghana had an initiative, and then you people brought in Volkswagen, and then there was what was that vehicle that was about to be launched in Ghana? So those are the kinds of realities. People would prefer to just take someone else's technologies. We need to develop our own, and we're capable of doing it.
Speaking of technologies, Winkate, we have not left you from the conversation. In your opening remarks, you spoke about handling the technical background of the summit, of the Africa Private Sector Summit. I dare say that in itself is a very important part, handling the back end and the technical parts and so on and so forth. Because without that, we cannot evidently get the number of people that we need to get to participate in the summit, with all the connections of Zoom and whatever else that come with it. So that already for you underscores how critical and central technology is in the whole conversation on Africa's development. And so in your view, for a summit like this, how would you say that coming at the time that it has come at it with COVID, where people are now more behind their screens and have become a bit more adaptable and flexible using technologies, how would you say, as someone who works on the technical bit, the role of technology and the private sector in this conversation of Africa's development? I ask that specifically because is it that COVID, this private sector summit has been occasioned by the fact that it's happening at the time of COVID, or would it have, in your view, happened? Could it have happened even when there wasn't this public health pandemic that we are dealing with? Hello, Winkate.
Yes, I'm here, Bensa. It's quite interesting what actually Dr. Sam covered, and it's an issue that I believe even those who are within my circle agree with, that what we are teaching and what is being, or rather what is needed in the market are totally different. That some of what we have studied is nowhere in form currently being used. Things from the industrial era, well, now we're talking about the fourth industrial revolution with technology, with artificial intelligence and the likes. And so it comes to a point where you also see a report that was given that if you're not careful, you might have another divide in terms of technological access. Because for the fourth industrial revolution, what you're talking about is technology, access to the internet, access to information, and that is going to drive the type of use that is going to be brought forward, especially for the African market by those who understand the African market, which I believe also Dr. Sam alluded to, in that sometimes you try to adopt technologies that have worked for different types of societies with their own foundations and settings to try and replicate that here, which would not necessarily work. I mean, M-Pesa, when it was brought out as an idea, it was laughed at. It was like, okay, there's no way anyone is going to use this, since banks in that particular area were using it as, you have your own ATM cards and things like this, so there was no need of mobile money. Mm-hmm. Bring it to the context of Kenya, where you have a lot of people who were not taking most of their money into the banks. You're talking about the farmers, the SMEs and the likes, because they may not have had all the information about how to capitalize on the banking system. M-Pesa blew up because now they have a way that they can easily access and send money. And then this also brings into the conversation that you see a lot of technology that is available worldwide. When it comes to Africa, it's adapted for the situation, and you end up having even studies now being conducted on on how they ended up, for example, M-Pesa becoming the thing that you can pay for anything you want on the streets, or even pay for your utilities, even again change between banks in terms of your finances, making it ease of access. And I also reiterate this thing of where you see again, as you're saying, that we want to bring back the minds that have adapted to the different nations or abroad, coming back to the continent, but their knowledge is not necessarily sustained by the infrastructure or the systems that we currently have on the continent. And coming back to even the private sector summit, I was having a conversation with one of the people who were bringing into the summit, where she said that if you think about it, those who will be able to access the summit are those who have either a laptop, access to internet or Wi-Fi and the like. So are we really reaching the people again? And that brings us also to start seeing how through COVID, perhaps this has pushed the government, has pushed the infrastructure, those who are providing telecommunications, to start understanding the important role of access to data and access to this type of information. Because you can imagine how many Zooms have happened and which people could have been able to capitalize on. And so it's, I think, an opportunity that has been created. At the same time, I feel the people themselves are ready to always innovate and capitalize on that to make it suited for the market. It's a matter of making that accessible for them. Maybe perhaps before I close, I would mention one technology I came across. It's called the brick technology. And ideally, it's a sort of remote way to distribute internet. And so they would have, they use more or less satellite communication back and forth, but they would use that brick technology in rural areas to try and give the farmers access to internet so that then they can monitor their production, as well as also be part of the market, which was only available on the web. So this is just some of the ways that you're starting to see the challenges providing opportunities that can also be adapted in other places of the world that you might consider third world and the like.
And I'm sure you can tell us a little bit more of that on another at another time. I really appreciate that little bit of information, Winke. My name is E.K. Benson Jr. We're talking we're talking Africa Private Sector Summit today with Winke Nuta of the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Addis Ababa and Dr. Sam Indoga of the University of Pretoria, two very strong people who are part of the organizing committee that has given birth to the African Private Sector Summit. Of course, there are other people who are part of the organizing committee who have not yet made it onto the show. We will be having a part 2 as the summit approaches, and maybe in the next 2 weeks or so. The title of today's edition is Righting Business Wrongs. So what are some of the wrongs that we know about? I think some of the wrongs, we've just spoken to one of them, which is technology. And interestingly, if you're following last week, when I was speaking to Juliet Amwa, Executive Director of Pen Plus Bytes, talking about technology being a challenge in the monitoring of elections during Ghana's elections, and how in Kenya that would not have been a problem because Kenya has somehow understood, as Winkate was saying, the centrality of IT infrastructure, ensuring that everybody needs to have access. To the point that when you are speaking with your Kenyan friends from Accra, they will be in their homes and their Wi-Fi will be running seamlessly. And you'll be running around in the bathroom, in the bedroom, all over your house, trying to get a stable connection in Accra, because we haven't yet got it right. That's a wrong that we need to fix in Ghana, and I pray that we really do something about that. If Kenya can do it right with Safaricom, I believe that we can do it right with all the 5 telcos or so that we have. Why is that not possible? Technology, we need to get it right at this time and find a way also to ensure that if we're talking in money terms, the unbanked of technology, those who are part of the digital divide can also get access to that level of technology to also contribute in the same way that the intelligentsia and what the UK call tattling classes have access to. So it shouldn't just be just the middle class or the elite who are just on Zoom all the time talking and, dreaming of big ideas. How do we translate those important points also to the rest of the population who have been touched by the digital divide, whether it's on their mobile phones or otherwise? So the wrong technology is one thing that needs to do. We've also talked about the enabling environment that needs to be fixed. That's also a wrong. Governments need to pay greater attention to fixing that particular wrong of making sure that the enabling environment is created so that private sector can do things seamlessly and not meet so many roadblocks along the way. The third wrong is curriculum. To what extent is there a disconnect between what is studied in the classrooms and what is studied outside? How far do you take what you have studied in the classroom to the practical world? And so that is why the importance of the Association of African Universities in this private sector summit is so important, because they'll be helping over the next couple of months and years, hopefully, that this long conversation is going to be held. The association will be part of the actors that will help also develop the curriculum that can speak to the issue of understanding African Continental Free Trade Area, the regional economic communities, everything around Africa's integration. Because as you know from other shows that I've spoken to, and editorials and otherwise, African Continental Free Trade Area is not just about intra-African trade. As the publication of last year, 2019, the ECA 2019 report said, it is not just about intra-African trade, but about dispelling the crisis of implementation and validating AU programs, which is to say that if the African Continental Free Trade Area could work with the momentum that it has, member states have signed on to it and ratified, so must the other 13 other flagship programs that the AU has under Agenda 2063, so must they work. The Freedom of Movement Protocol that we are struggling to see come to light, where only 4 member countries have signed and ratified. We're waiting for 11. How do you move across the continent? How do you trade on the continent when you are not able to move freely? These are very critical questions that we need to address in the context of the African Continental Free Trade Area, in the conversation on an enabling environment and so on and so forth. So as we begin to wind down, and I'll come to Winkate and I'll come to Dr. Ndoga to offer their closing remarks, I just want to sound this out for the audience. And I've elaborated it specifically in this way because of the importance of the summit, having Association of African Universities there in a summit like that, and trying to create a new narrative where business and private sector are able to work together for Africa's development. It is something that has been talked about many times over in different summits, but this time we want to get it right. We need your support, so we need you to register, africaprivatesectorsummit.org. We need you to go there and register, contribute whichever ways you can. There's a call for papers as well. 15 good questions on each of the 5 days collectively. Identify a question that you want to write about, get writing so that you can also contribute your quota to Africa's development. These papers will be picked by the organizers and partners and so on. So we'll take a look and then we'll see what we do about it, whether it's an academy, whatever that needs to be done. But this is a very, very critical summit that we need you to be part of. And we need you to also be praising the Association of African Universities. They've done very good work with this show and the great work that they do on academia. But now a new journey has begun where they're going to be linking with the private sector to create important curriculums and develop model laws and all these things. So we hope that you will join us on this.